And today we're diving into excerpts from the book Think Straight, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Darius Foroux.
Right. For A, based just on what we have here, is an entrepreneur, a blogger, podcaster, and he self-published this book. Seems like he's really aiming for honesty, sharing what he's figured out about thinking from his own life.
Yeah, very personal perspective. And he kicks off with a really bold idea.
He really does. His core proposition is basically this. You have the power to decide what you think. And this isn't just, some philosophical nice to have. He says your life's results depend directly on your thoughts.
So improving how you think, that's the most important thing. More important than anything else.
That's his argument. Because if you get better control over your thoughts, you can directly improve, everything, your life, your career, your general well-being.
Okay, that definitely grabs your attention. It puts the power firmly back in your own hands, doesn't it?
Precisely. You might not control the external world, but you can influence your internal one, and that shapes how you experience everything.
All right, I'm definitely intrigued. So our mission for this deep dive is clear. Unpack his practical take on how to actually change your thoughts, filter all the noise, avoid common mental traps, and, really take charge of your own mind.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're sticking only to the insights that are right here in these specific excerpts we've been given.
Right. No outside info, just what's in the source. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the absolute bedrock of this whole thing seems to be that idea. If you can change your mind, you can change your life. It sounds almost simple, maybe even a bit cliche.
It can sound that way on the surface, yeah. But the source immediately gives it weight by grounding it in a really intense historical example, the story of William James.
William James. Huge names in psychology and philosophy. Graduated from Harvard, became a doctor. Seemed like he had it all figured out, right?
You'd think so. He graduated in 1869, super young, 27. But right at that moment, he was actually in the depths of a massive personal crisis. A really profound one.
And we're not talking about just feeling a bit down. The source paints a picture of serious suffering.
Oh, absolutely. It describes him dealing with debilitating physical illness, crippling depression, actual panic attacks, even hallucinations. It sounds like he was in utter despair.
That's terrifying. And what made it worse, according to the source, was his belief about why it was happening.
Exactly. He initially believed it was purely biological, something he'd maybe inherited from his father. And because he thought it was biological, he felt it was, unconquerable, like it was his predetermined fate.
So he felt completely powerless, trapped by his own body and mind.
Totally powerless. Which, the source mentions, led him to spend months contemplating suicide. Just imagine feeling that trapped, like there's no way out, because it's just how you're built.
That's a dark place. But then something changed in 1870. He had some kind of breakthrough.
He did. It was apparently sparked by reading an essay by a French philosopher, Charles Renouvier. After finishing it, James wrote in his journal, and the source quotes this, that he couldn't see any logical reason why Renouvier's definition of free will had to be an illusion.
Okay, so what was Renouvier's definition that clicked for him?
As James apparently understood it, free will wasn't about controlling every weird thoughts popping all the time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It was about the ability to choose to sustain a particular thought, even when other thoughts are clamoring for attention. It's about deciding where to put your focus.
Okay. So it's not about silencing the noise, but about choosing which voice in the choir you actually listen to and amplify.
Precisely. And that understanding led to that amazing line in his journal. My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will.
Wow. It's like deciding to believe was the very act that proved it was possible. A bootstrap maneuver for the mind.
Exactly. And this distinction is really the core of it. You might not control the thought's arrival, but you can control your attention. That decision, that deliberate focus, is where the power lies, according to this view.
And this wasn't just a fleeting idea for James. The source says this became central to pragmatism, the philosophy he co-founded.
Right, with Charles Sanders Peirce. Pragmatism, in this light, is all about the idea that we can steer our consciousness by choosing which thoughts to cultivate. It's a shift away from feeling like a victim of your feelings. I can't help feeling this way, towards exploring, maybe I feel this way partly because I'm choosing to focus on these thoughts.
It gives you agency back. And the source also brings in Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was James's godfather, apparently.
Yeah, a nice little connection there. And Emerson put it much more simply. You become what you think about all day long.
That really cuts to the chase. It makes it feel less abstract, more about your daily mental habits.
It does. And Foroux, the author here, clearly buys into this premise completely. But he adds that really crucial next step. Actions follow thoughts. You can't fundamentally change what you do without changing how you think first.
Which brings it right back to you, the listener. If this holds water, if your thoughts genuinely shape your life, from your mood right now to where you end up in 10 years, then figuring out how to manage those thoughts isn't just interesting.
It becomes maybe the most practical, most fundamental skill you could possibly work on. It's like the steering wheel for your own life experience.
Okay, so if our thoughts are that critical, why isn't everyone a Zen master of their own mind? This leads to the next big point in the source, the need for practical thinking.
Right. The author starts by emphasizing just how incredible the human brain is. He calls it our most important tool, even quoting Robert Greene, saying it's basically the most miraculous piece of kit in the known universe. More amazing than any tech.
Okay, agreed. The brain is amazing. So what's the catch?
The catch, according to Foroux, is that we're born with this supercomputer, but nobody really teaches us how to use it effectively. He flat out calls humans highly impractical beings.
Impractical. But we think of ourselves as rational, logical creatures, don't we? That's our whole thing.
That's exactly the irony. And he points to research confirming we aren't naturally practical thinkers. He mentions Dan O'Reilly, the behavioral economist, who argues we think we're making decisions logically.
Well,
But really, that perception is often more about how we wish we were, our desire to see ourselves as rational, than the messy reality of how feelings, biases, and shortcuts actually drive our choices.
And this ties into cognitive biases, right?
Absolutely. The source specifically mentions scientists finding more than 100 cognitive biases or thinking errors. These aren't just random slip-ups. They're systematic ways our thinking veers off from pure logic.
So we're wired to jump to conclusions based on gut feelings, emotions, what seems easy, not always what's actually true or rational.
Pretty much. We rely on mental shortcuts, often without even realizing it. We have this incredible tool, but it comes with all these, let's say, undocumented features or bugs, and no one gives us the manual or highlights the known issues.
Which apparently frustrated the author when he looked at other books about thinking.
Yeah, he felt that while many books are great at explaining why we think irrationally, maybe using cool stories and studies, they often fell short on the practical side. They diagnose the problem brilliantly, but don't give you enough actionable steps on how to actually change your thinking patterns.
So he saw a gap there, a need for a more hands-on guide.
Exactly. His goal with this book seems to be providing that practical guide, drawing from his own journey. He hopes you'll find at least one solid idea you can actually use to think straighter and improve things in your life, your business, whatever.
And he's upfront about it being his perspective, focusing on useful versus useless thoughts, and basically saying, take what works for you, leave the rest.
Which seems fair. He's sharing his map, not claiming it's the only territory.
So for you listening, just grasping this, that we're not naturally practical thinkers, that biases are real and affect everyone, and that just knowing about them isn't enough, it really frames why actively working on how you think is so crucial. It's not our default state. It needs deliberate effort.
And that effort, that deliberate practice, is central to the next idea. Clear thinking requires training.
This builds right on the brain as a tool idea. He takes the metaphor further, comparing the mind to a muscle.
Exactly. Just like if you want strong biceps, you have to lift weights regularly. If you want a strong, clear mind, you need to train it consistently. It doesn't just happen.
And he contrasts this with how we often view learning, right? Like it's something that stops after school.
Yeah, this conventional idea that you do your formal education, high school, maybe college, get the certificate, and boom, learning phase complete. Move on to real life.
Which often means settling into routines, comfortable routines, familiar ways of thinking.
And he suggests we stick to the familiar because, well, thinking new thoughts, challenging our own beliefs, it takes effort. It can feel uncomfortable, even a bit scary. Our brains often prefer the path of least resistance.
He also pokes at how we relax our minds. We binge watch shows or scroll endlessly.
Right. And he asks, what exactly are we resting from? Is it the genuinely demanding mental work we do? Or is it maybe the exhaustion of just letting our minds spin in those same old chaotic, often unproductive loops?
That's a really interesting question. Are we resting from thinking or resting by avoiding useful thinking?
It makes you wonder, and it leads to his point that We rarely push our minds, really strain them, unless we absolutely have to, like for a test or a huge deadline at work. We don't typically seek out mental workouts just for the sake of staying sharp.
Which brings him back to the core analogy. Physical fitness requires ongoing effort. You wouldn't hit the gym for 2 years, get fit, then stop completely, and expect to stay that way.
Exactly. So why treat our minds differently? If the brain is our most vital tool, shouldn't we be committed to lifelong mental exercise to keep it performing well?
He even quotes the Stoic philosopher Epictetus here.
Yeah, emphasizing that wisdom requires reason, and clear thinking needs proper training. It's not random, it's disciplined.
That word training really hits home. It implies deliberate practice. And this wasn't just theory for the author either. He talks about his own past mental state.
He does. He describes his thoughts as being completely out of control. He realized he'd never actually stopped to think about his own thinking process.
He uses that image of drawing his thoughts as pure chaos.
Yeah, just a jumbled mess, positive, negative, sad, happy, all swirling together with no order. He felt constantly bombarded, asking himself, why can't my brain just stop? Is there an off switch?
And looking back, he sees that chaos as a direct result of not knowing how to wield his brain like a tool. It was controlling him, not the other way around.
And maybe you, listening, recognize that feeling, that sense of mental static, the constant chatter that's hard to direct. If you start viewing your mind less as just you and more as a muscle you can train, it reframes the whole challenge. It becomes less about some impossible goal of stopping thoughts and more about the gradual, achievable process of building mental strength and focus through practice.
And to make this really concrete, he shares a personal story moving from that chaos towards clarity.
Yeah, it's a great illustration. He talks about moving back in 2014 from Leeuwarden, which he describes as a smaller, quieter Dutch city, to London. Massive change, 7 million people. And the immediate big hurdle, finding somewhere to live.
Okay, a common challenge in big cities. What was his plan?
His plan seemed totally logical, very linear. Rent a room short-term for maybe 3 months, use that time to check out different areas, figure out the commute, then find a proper long-term apartment. Sensible, right?
It sounds perfectly reasonable. What went wrong?
Well, life happened. Literally the day before he was supposed to move into this temporary room, he'd found the landlady called him up.
Oh no, don't tell me.
Yep, she'd changed her mind. Last minute cancellation.
Wow, so he was completely stuck.
Completely. No place to live. And the kicker, his family was driving over from Holland with his stuff packed in the car, ready to the move the next day. He had a car full of belongings, family en route, and absolutely nowhere to go in a massive, unfamiliar city.
Oh, I can feel the panic just hearing that.
He describes it as panicking big time. His mind immediately went into overdrive, blaming himself, feeling like a total idiot for messing it up, for dragging his family into this mess, just lost in the what-ifs and self-criticism.
And reflecting on it later, what did he see about his own thinking in that moment?
He's very honest. He says he was being overdramatic. He was so caught up in the internal storms, the panic, the blame, the worry, that he completely lost perspective on the actual situation. He wasn't thinking clearly at all, just reacting emotionally to what was objectively a solvable first world problem, as he puts it.
Okay, so how did he snap out of that spiral?
The shift happened the next day. His family was there, they encouraged him, and he just decided he'd had enough of the mental meltdown. He consciously chose to stop wallowing and start problem solving. He literally told himself, think straight.
He wanted to cut through the noise, replace that whole mess of useless thoughts, the worry, the stress, the confusion, with just one clear, useful thought focused on finding a solution.
Exactly. He wanted to use his mind as a tool again, direct it towards a purpose instead of letting it run wild like a panicked animal.
And once he did that, once he focused,
the solution wasn't actually that hard to find. It was pretty straightforward. Book an Airbnb for a short period while he regrouped and found something more permanent.
Right. Simple enough when you're thinking clearly. And then came the ironic twist.
The perfect, almost comical twist. The original landlady called back again and changed her mind again. She decided she would rent the room to him after all.
You're kidding. So all that panic, the stress, the feeling like an idiot
was, as he says, especially useless. Totally pointless suffering, generated entirely by his own out-of-control thinking.
That is such a relatable story. We've all been there, right? Letting our minds spin catastrophe scenarios based on assumptions, only for reality to turn out fine, making all that worry look ridiculous in hindsight.
It really highlights how easily we let assumptions drive our mental state. rather than sticking to the facts. He makes the point that people making mistakes or changing their minds, like the landlady did, that's normal human stuff. What's not normal, or at least not helpful, is letting our own minds spiral into chaos in response.
And he emphasizes this wasn't like a single aha moment that fixed his thinking forever. It wasn't a movie scene.
No, he stresses that life usually isn't like that. It was more like, after experiencing countless episodes of this kind of useless thinking, he just gradually got fed up. He reached a point where he simply had enough of mental suffering.
It was an accumulation of frustration leading to a decision to change.
Exactly. So, starting about 2 years before we wrote the book, he began the conscious, deliberate practice of noticing and changing his thought patterns, learning to replace the chaos with clarity. And the result? He found much more peace and happiness.
It really drives home that this thinking straight is a skill you build over time with practice, and it has real-world effects on your well-being. And this whole challenge, trying to get a grip on our thoughts, it's not a new problem. The source gives a quick tour through history here.
Yeah, a brief history and methods of thinking. It circles back to emphasize the importance of thought quality. He quotes Marcus Aurelius, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Our inner world shapes our outer reality."
And this feels incredibly relevant today, with the world changing so fast. Jobs, tech, money, time, it all feels uncertain.
Totally. It breeds anxiety. How do I keep up? How do I adapt? How do I just, stay sane through it all? And in that context, mastering your thoughts isn't just a nice idea. The source argues it's essential for navigating modern life. It's tough, but necessary.
And people have been wrestling with this for millennia. Philosophers since way back in the 5th century BC recognized the mind as a problem-solving tool and saw the link between thought quality and life quality.
He mentions a few big names: Confucius, Socrates, Descartes, William James again, all grappling with this. He touches on the Socratic method, questioning everything, especially yourself.
Socrates' famous line, "I know one thing, that I know nothing." That wasn't false modesty, was it?
Not at all. It was profound self-awareness. Recognizing your own ignorance, being willing to question your most basic assumptions, that is a powerful way of thinking. It's about intellectual humility and continuous inquiry.
Then there's Descartes, taking questioning to the extreme, doubting his own existence.
Right, leading to cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The very act of doubting proved he existed. But the source points out that if you actually observe your own thoughts, like Descartes did, you'll probably find a lot of contradictions and inconsistencies.
Our minds aren't always logically coherent.
Far from it. And according to the source, Descartes' big takeaway was, don't just question your beliefs, question the source of those beliefs, because most of what we believe isn't from rigorous analysis. It's from perception, ours or someone else's, that we just accepted.
That's a huge point for thinking straight. How much of what you believe, listener, is based on solid ground versus just absorbed opinions, first reactions, unchecked assumptions?
It forces you to confront the core challenge of thinking. How do we tell what's true from what's false, especially within our own minds?
And this brings pragmatism back into the picture, not as the ultimate answer, but as a practical method for tackling that question.
William James described the pragmatic approach as looking away from abstract first principles and looking towards last things, fruits, consequences, facts.
So don't get bogged down in theory. Focus on the real-world results.
That's the essence of it, as presented here. Thoughts should serve a useful purpose. If a thought doesn't help you solve a problem, understand something useful, or lead to a positive outcome, it's essentially useless clutter. Filtering based on usefulness is straight thinking, according to the author.
It sounds simple, but doing it consistently requires effort, like that Henry Ford quote the source uses.
Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably the reason why so few engage in it.
It's tough work, but the argument is it's the most important work because the quality of that thinking dictates the quality of your decisions and ultimately the quality of your life.
Moving on from these fundamentals, the author shares another big shift in his thinking, realizing that life is not linear.
He admits he used to think very much in straight lines. A leads to B leads to C. Simple cause and effect.
Yeah, basing it all on how things looked on the surface, his first thoughts, lots of assumptions, which he now sees as completely impractical. He realized he wasn't actually thinking. He was just following conventional scripts, letting society or expectations do the thinking for him.
And he gives some real-life examples where his linear thinking got completely blown up, like the college degree thing.
Oh yeah. He genuinely believed, well into his 20s apparently, that getting a degree automatically meant getting a good job. Like it was a guaranteed pass.
A very common belief.
Totally. But he learned the hard way. Nothing's guaranteed. You have to work for money. And career success isn't just about the credential. It's about having valuable skills. The more value you offer, the more you earn. Life definitely wasn't that neat degree Job success line.
He also had a linear view of achieving goals, like starting his business.
Right. He wanted freedom, so he thought, okay, I'll start a business, work on it directly, and achieve freedom. A straight shot. But the reality, it was messy. Detours, working for others, failed businesses along the way. It was anything but linear.
So understanding this non-linearity, how did that change his approach?
It made him much more adaptable. When things inevitably went off plan, which they always do, he didn't just freeze or give up because his straight-line expectation failed. Instead, recognizing that life is nonlinear prompted him to immediately start thinking about Plan B, Plan C, alternative routes to still move towards his goal.
He uses a real estate investment example to show this in action.
Yeah, his goal, invest in property. But living in London and Amsterdam, super expensive cities, he just didn't have the capital. The linear thought might be, stay here, work harder, sacrifice everything until I save enough.
Along the potentially miserable path.
Right. But he took a nonlinear approach. Instead of fixating on making it work there, he broadened his search, looked at other growing markets that were more affordable. And this led him, ironically, back to his hometown, Leeuwarden.
The place he left.
Exactly. And it turned out the conditions there were actually ideal for him at that moment. Low prices, he had a network, the city was growing.
And the result of this nonlinear detour?
He found and bought his first investment property there within just 2 months of shifting his focus. The takeaway is powerful. There's rarely just one way to reach a goal. And often, if everyone else is crowding one obvious path, maybe look for the less obvious, nonlinear detours.
So, listener, are you stuck in linear thinking about any of your goals? Assuming there's only one right way, how could embracing life's inherent messiness and nonlinearity actually open up more options and make you more resilient when Plan A doesn't work out?
And speaking of how our brains handle complexity, the source touches on how we process information and make connections. The brain, connecting the dots.
He points out that our brains are always working, right? Even when we're not consciously focusing.
Constantly. Scanning new information, comparing it to everything we already know and have experienced. This background process is fundamental to how we think, how we learn, how we come up with new ideas. It's all about neurons connecting, forming pathways between different bits of knowledge.
And knowing this changed how the author approaches learning.
Yeah, he says he stopped worrying about needing an immediate practical application for everything he learns. He trusts the process. He focuses on feeding his brain with things he's curious about, different subjects, skills, even if they seem totally unrelated at the time.
He's essentially collecting the dots without knowing the picture yet.
Exactly. Which perfectly sets up that famous Steve Jobs quote the source includes, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. You have to trust they'll connect later."
Such a great quote. It suggests the real value of learning often reveals itself later, in unexpected ways.
And the practical insight Foroux pulls from this is key. If you want to be able to make those creative connections later, to have those aha moments, you need to be actively forming the dots now.
And how to form dots?
By learning, doing, experiencing, making mistakes, reflecting. Basically by feeding your brain diverse and interesting input. That's the raw material your brain needs to build future insights and solutions.
So listener, are you consciously feeding your brain a varied diet? Or mostly consuming the same type of information? How does trusting that the dots will connect later change how you view learning and new experiences today? It shifts the focus from immediate payoff to building long-term mental capital.
And all this information we're feeding our brains. Well, it leads to the problem of overload. The source tackles this under filtering information, heuristics versus pragmatism.
Yeah, the sheer amount of information hitting us daily is insane. News, social media, work emails, it's a constant barrage.
It really is. And our brains literally can't process it all consciously. So to cope, they develop mental shortcuts heuristics. These are quick ways to make judgments based on past experience, designed to save mental energy.
He gives a few examples of these shortcuts.
Right. One is basic trial and error. Try something, see if it works.
Yeah.
Useful sometimes, but as he points out, maybe not the best strategy for huge life goals like building a career. Life is too short to learn everything by making every possible mistake yourself.
What other heuristics does he mention?
Social proof is a big one. Doing things or believing things just because lots of other people do. If it's popular, it must be good, right?
A very common one. And familiarity.
Ah, yes, the familiarity heuristic. Our tendency to prefer what we know. It explains why we get stuck in ruts. Same food, same route to work, same mistakes, same approach to problems. Familiarity feels safe, certain. But breakthroughs usually require stepping outside the familiar.
So these shortcuts, while maybe making things feel easier in the moment, can hold us back.
That's his argument. Relying too heavily on these heuristics often leads to unsatisfying outcomes. And those unsatisfying results should be seen as a signal. Your thinking, your approach needs to change.
Okay, if heuristics often lead us astray, what's the alternative filter he proposes?
He brings back that pragmatist idea. True is what works. He suggests using this as a practical filter for information and decisions, not, he cautions, as a license to do anything to. He gives that example of a friend saying drugs work for him, which isn't the point.
Right, it's not just about immediate gratification. It's like saying good things come to those who wait doesn't mean literally just sit there doing nothing.
Exactly. The filter, true is what works, means asking, will the outcome of this decision or acting on this information actually make a useful, positive difference in my life?
How does asking that consistently help cut through the noise?
He believes it forces you to filter out tons of useless distractions.
Yeah.
You start focusing only on things that have a real, tangible impact on your life outcomes, your habits, your results. It shifts the focus from what's popular, easy, or abstractly true to what is concretely useful for you.
He uses his move between cities again to illustrate this filter.
Right. Conventional thinking may be driven by social proof. Everyone moves to big cities for opportunity. Suggested London was the right move, and he did find opportunity there. But applying the what works for me filter revealed a different story.
Yeah.
The stress, the cost, the crowds. He just didn't like big city life.
So professionally, it might have seemed to work, but personally, holistically, it didn't.
Exactly. It wasn't working for his overall well-being, which is why moving back to the smaller city, Leeuwarden, did work for him, even if it looked like a step backward by conventional standards. It gave him the quiet, the network, the lower costs he needed to thrive in his way.
And he's clear the solution isn't universal, it's about finding what works for you.
Absolutely. So, listener, think about the shortcuts you rely on. Do you default to the familiar? Follow the crowd? How might applying that filter what actually works for me, what will genuinely impact my life in a useful way, change how you approach decisions and consume information? It's a powerful way to personalize your thinking.
This idea of filtering out the useless brings us squarely to a major challenge: controlling the mind itself, specifically stopping what he calls thinking, that state of being preoccupied.
Yeah, he acknowledges thinking is hard work, and stopping the internal chatter, especially at night, is really tough for many people.
He makes a pretty shocking claim about his own past thoughts.
He does. He estimates that 99% of his thoughts used to be completely useless.
99%. What does he mean by useless in that context?
He means they didn't lead anywhere productive. He wasn't using those thoughts to actively solve problems or to genuinely try and understand something complex.
So what was he doing? He calls it being preoccupied.
Right. Not productive thinking, but more like worrying, stressing, ruminating, freaking out.
Yeah.
And the source lists examples that are painfully familiar to most of us.
Like what kind of thoughts?
Things like, I wonder what my boss thinks of me. What if I totally mess this up? He obviously doesn't care. Why do I keep failing at this? Does she still love me? Why is my life so hard? Or even, why is my life great when others are suffering? I hate my job. What's wrong with me? Why can't I finish anything? That constant nagging one, I want to quit.
Oof. Yeah, that list hits close to home. Those thoughts definitely drain energy without offering solutions.
Exactly. He asked the direct question, what is the practical use of thoughts like these? And his answer is blunt, none. They don't help you move forward. They just keep you stuck in a loop of unproductive mental noise.
But we all have them. You can't just wish them away. So how do you deal with them?
This comes back to that key insight from William James again. You can't necessarily stop these thoughts from arising. You can't completely control consciousness. But what you can control is your response to them. You choose which thoughts get your follow-through, your energy, your focus.
So it's about awareness and choosing what to engage with.
Precisely. He advocates for cultivating awareness. Just notice the thought when it pops up. Acknowledge it's there, but don't beat yourself up for having it. The crucial step isn't figuring out why the thought is there, but deciding consciously whether you're going to ignore it or give it importance and let it influence your actions.
He uses his own recurring, I want to quit thought as an example.
Yes, He says that thought has popped up constantly throughout his life, especially during tough times. It used to cause him massive stress, sleepless nights.
But he decided to change how he reacted to it. He decided to quit thinking about quitting in that useless way.
Exactly that. About 2 years before writing the book, he consciously decided to stop letting that thought automatically derail him. He learned to notice it, acknowledge it, and then essentially tell it, "You don't control me."
And how did that change things for him?
He reports being much calmer, much happier. He still listens to the thoughts sometimes because occasionally it is a valid signal that a real change is needed. But most of the time now, he recognizes it for what it usually is, just fear talking. And he consciously chooses not to let fear dictate his actions or consume his energy.
Okay, so listener, what are some of those recurring, useless thoughts that occupy your mind? Can you practice just noticing them when they arise, acknowledging them without judgment, and then consciously deciding which thoughts deserve your attention and energy, and which ones you can just let float by?
And this skill, choosing where to place your mental importance, leads right into a very practical rule of thumb the author offers, focusing on what you can control.
This sounds like it could be a really powerful filter.
He thinks so. He makes another bold claim. If you rigorously apply this rule, only thinking about things you can actually control, you'll probably eliminate 99% of your current thoughts.
99% again. That really suggests most of our mental energy goes towards things we can't influence.
That's his perspective. He believes there's actually very little you control in life when you really break it down.
Okay, so according to the source, what can we control?
The list is short and very internal. Your desires, what you choose to want. Your actions, what you choose to do. Your words, what you choose to say. And your intentions, the why behind your actions. That's basically it.
Everything else, other people, the past, the future, beyond your current actions, the economy, random events, is outside that circle of control.
Essentially, yes. So a useless thought, by this definition, is any thought about something outside your control that also doesn't serve a useful problem-solving or learning purpose.
He gives examples, right, like thinking about the past.
Yes, dwelling on the past is useless unless you are specifically reflecting on a mistake or decision to extract a lesson you can apply now. Same with fantasizing about the future. It's useless unless it's part of actively planning, problem-solving, or understanding something that helps you shape that future through your current actions.
This really sharpens the definition of useful versus useless thinking. So, what are the main categories of useful thoughts, according to this?
He boils it down to two main types. One, thinking actively about how to solve problems. Defining a problem is simply an unanswered question. This is using your brain purposefully as a tool. Two, actively understanding knowledge, not just consuming facts, but internalizing information and thinking about how you can use it to improve your life, work, relationships, skills, whatever.
And the simple rule flowing from that.
If a thought doesn't fit into one of those two categories, problem solving or understanding useful knowledge, and it's about something outside your control, you can pretty much ignore it. Let it go.
It makes a certain kind of ruthless sense. If your mind is just spinning constantly on things you can't control and that aren't leading to solutions or useful understanding, then
in his view, your mind isn't trained yet. You're stuck in your head, preoccupied. And he warns that letting that continue risks burning yourself out, going mental from the noise.
And he asks that pointed question again. Is that worth it? Is wasting all that time and energy on uncontrollable, unproductive thoughts worth it? He urges a commitment to stop the useless thinking and start directing your mind intentionally, arguing that worrying about the past or future hasn't helped before and won't start now.
So listener, maybe do a quick audit. What percentage of your thoughts today were genuinely focused on things within your control, your desires, actions, words, intentions? How could shifting more of your mental energy towards active problem solving and understanding useful knowledge change your daily experience? Maybe even free up significant mental bandwidth.
This really challenges us to be more deliberate. And it leads to another reason why we need to be so deliberate. Our minds aren't always reliable allies. The source explains why you can't always trust your mind, circling back to cognitive biases.
Exactly. He hammers home the point that we're not inherently logical. Because of these biases, these systematic thinking errors, each of us creates our own subjective reality. We don't see the world objectively. We see it through our own unique, biased filters.
He reminds us these biases were systematically studied by Tversky and Kahneman back in the 70s. They're predictable patterns where our judgment deviates from pure logic or rationality.
And he singles out a couple of specific biases again. One is attentional bias. He sees this as basically scientific proof for the idea that you become what you think.
How so? How does attentional bias show that?
Because attentional bias means our perceptions are shaped by what we habitually pay attention to, and our thoughts direct our attention. So if you're constantly having negative thoughts, you'll tend to notice and focus on the negative things around you. Those negative perceptions then influence your decisions and actions, leading to negative outcomes, creating a self-reinforcing loop. Simple cause and effect, driven by where your thoughts direct your attention. Another major one he mentions is confirmation bias. We've touched on it, but it's worth repeating that powerful drive to find and favor information that confirms what we already believe.
So we actively seek out proof that we're right and ignore or dismiss anything that challenges our existing views.
Pretty much. It feels good to be right, so our brains often prioritize confirming our beliefs over finding the objective truth. We look at our beliefs first, then find facts to fit, rather than looking at facts first.
After learning about all these different biases, the author draws a rather stark conclusion.
He does. He states it plainly. Your mind can't be trusted. He even humorously questions if that conclusion itself is a bias.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? If your own mind is fundamentally unreliable, what do you base your decisions on?
And that's the crucial question he addresses. His advice: don't make important decisions based only on your gut feelings, your initial beliefs, what seems like obvious logic, or even solely on science, because scientists are human too and can be biased towards confirming their own theories.
Okay, so if not just beliefs or logic or even science alone, then what?
He argues the key isn't just piling up more knowledge, because more knowledge filtered through a biased mind might just lead to smarter-sounding justifications for bad decisions. The solution, he proposes, is cultivating a pragmatic and neutral perspective, aiming for objectivity, even knowing perfect objectivity is impossible.
And this leads to better informed decisions, not necessarily perfect ones, but better.
Exactly. He acknowledges there's rarely a single best decision. Life's complex, but there are definitely better informed choices and worse informed ones. Aim for the former.
It's easy after reading a bit about something to feel like an expert, like you've got it all figured out.
He warns against that explicitly. No matter how much you learn, you still can't fully trust your own judgments because those biases are always operating subtly in the background. But crucially, just knowing they're there, being aware of your potential blind spots, helps you approach decisions with more humility and caution. It prompts you to seek more diverse information and perspectives.
He even suggests a practical tool for breaking out of biased thinking patterns.
Yeah, if you feel stuck in a loop or unsure about a judgment, he suggests literally pulling up the Wikipedia list of cognitive biases. Reading through them can often help you identify the specific mental shortcut or error you might be falling prey to, which can snap you out of it. He notes that many biases seem like common sense when you read them, which highlights how deeply ingrained these illogical patterns are in our everyday thinking.
So listener, think about your own patterns. Which cognitive biases do you suspect influence your thinking most often? How can simply recognizing these systematic errors help you approach your judgments, beliefs, and decisions with a bit more skepticism and a greater commitment to seeking out solid information?
And this unreliability of our minds, our tendency towards bias and assumption, leads into a related distinction the source explores: facts versus assumptions, and truth versus interpretations.
He really doesn't like assumptions, does he?
No, he states a strong dislike, even while admitting he makes them constantly himself. He gives those everyday examples. Assuming someone hates you because they didn't reply to an email quickly, assuming an apology isn't sincere, thinking a headache means brain cancer. We do it all the time. But assumptions aren't facts, so relying on them is impractical, based on guesswork, not reality.
So the rule for thinking straight is clear. Ditch the assumptions, stick to the facts.
That's the goal. He again quotes William James on the pragmatist, focusing on facts and concreteness, observing things in action, and then generalizing. Look at what is, not what you imagine or fear might be.
The source gives some great contrasting examples here.
Yeah, like asking, does your product factually solve a real problem based on data? Or do you just assume it does? Can you factually raise money for your startup based on commitments? Or do you assume you will?
Will you factually get that raise based on performance reviews? Or do you just assume your boss owes it to you? Is the sale factually closed with a signature? Or do you assume the client will sign eventually?
These really highlight the gap between evidence-based thinking and assumption-based thinking. His preference is clear. Always try to base conclusions on facts. Only in rare cases, with no facts available and a need for speed, does he rely on his gut feeling, which he sees as informed intuition, preferable to others' ill-informed opinions and guesses.
Facts over assumptions. Got it. But then he complicates it by talking about facts versus truth. That sounds tricky.
It is a bit philosophical, yeah. He admits it's confusing, like life. He uses the example of God's existence. Scientifically, you might say there are no objective facts proving it.
Okay, factually unproven in a scientific sense. But
if someone's belief in God gives their life meaning, guides their actions, provides immense comfort, if it works for them in a profound, practical way, then that belief holds a kind of truth for them. Its truth is in its impact, not necessarily its objective verifiability.
this brings Friedrich Nietzsche into the conversation.
Right, with that famous line, "There are no facts, only interpretations." The source mentions Nietzsche's incredible self-insight, even quoting Freud praising it.
So how does the source interpret Nietzsche's point here?
It takes it to mean that ultimately, our experience of reality is always filtered through our subjective lens. We can gather facts, which are useful, but we interpret those facts based on our own framework. Objective, capital T truth that everyone agrees on might be impossible to grasp, especially for complex issues. Facts aren't the same as ultimate truth.
And accepting this saves energy. How?
Because if you accept that everyone is operating from their own interpretation, you can stop wasting energy trying to definitively prove others wrong about subjective truths, or convince them your interpretation is the only valid one. Arguing about whose interpretation is the real truth is often futile and impractical. Recognizing this can lead to more tolerance and less mental drain from pointless debates.
So, listener, how often do you mistake your assumptions for facts? And does, considering that maybe there are no facts, only interpretations, in the sense that our experience is always filtered, change how you think about disagreements or what you consider true for yourself versus others? It challenges us to think about where we place value on objective data or subjective impact.
Another very practical piece of advice in the source concerns pace. It champions the value of slow thinking, taking your time.
This definitely goes against the grain. We often think being smart means being fast, quick-wit, thinking on your feet.
We do. The author admits he used to believe that too and tried to be that quick answer guy, but he realized his fast, impulsive answers usually just, well, sucked, as he puts it. They weren't thoughtful, they were reactive.
He holds up Derek Sivers, the CD Baby founder, as an example of a slow thinker.
Yeah, someone he really admires. Sivers' view is that your first reaction, your first thought, is often outdated. It's either a canned response you've used before without really thinking, or it's an old emotional pattern kicking in that might not fit the current situation at all.
So that immediate reaction isn't fresh thinking.
Usually not. Truly thinking something through, considering different angles, potential consequences that inherently takes time. Quick answers are often just impulses dressed up as thought. Severs apparently trained himself not to trust his first thoughts, using his email overload as a case study.
Right. He got tons of quick questions.
Exactly. Emails asking for just 5 minutes. But hundreds of those add up. He realized the sheer volume meant the quick answer approach was totally unsustainable.
So what was his first thought solution to the email flood?
His initial reactive, maybe fast thinking solution was extreme. Just shut it all down. Go off grid, become totally unreachable.
A bit drastic.
Yeah. But then, presumably, after some slower, more deliberate thought, came his second idea, which the author thinks was much smarter. Stay reachable, but intentionally don't answer questions right away. Build in a delay.
Give himself time to think before responding.
Exactly. The author mentions emailing Severs and appreciating this, you get a considered reply, not just an instant one.
The bigger point seems to be, it's okay, even better, to pause.
Absolutely. He stresses it's fine to say, "I don't know" to others, or even to yourself when facing a tricky problem. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you're human, and thinking takes time. He admits he used to be hard on himself for not having instant answers, but accepting the need for processing time was freeing.
But there's that social pressure, that fear of looking dumb if you don't reply instantly.
Right. And he says that very fear is a perfect example of when you need slow thinking. Instead of reacting to the fear, quick, say something smart. Step back. Ask why you feel that pressure. What's driving the need to appear instantly brilliant? Examine the reaction itself.
His final word on slow thinking.
It's always better to take your time. If someone else thinks that makes you slow or stupid, that says more about their impatience and judgment than your thoughtfulness.
So, listener, where do you feel pressure to be quick? Could deliberately embracing slow thinking, pausing, considering, saying, "Let me think about that," lead to better decisions and maybe less anxiety about what others think?
And flowing directly from valuing slow thought comes the brief but important point. No more quick decisions.
Seems like the logical next step. If slow thinking is good, quick decisions are probably bad.
That's the implication. The source doesn't go into a long explanation here, but lists several examples of situations where people often push for or make quick decisions.
What kind of examples?
Pretty common stuff.
Yeah?
Like, hey, should we book that business trip to Thailand next month? Could be great. Could be a huge time money sink. Interested in speaking at company X? Opportunity, but does it fit your priorities? Should we redo the kitchen? Major expense, big disruption. Think we need to fire John Doe. Huge human impact. How about hiring another salesperson? Affects budget, team dynamics.
These are all non-trivial decisions presented as if they could be made on the spot.
Exactly. And he briefly mentions his own context while writing the book, being deeply focused on that. Plus, opening an office and buying an apartment meant he was less open to spontaneous additions than at other times in his life when he might have been more flexible.
So while this section doesn't give a specific how-to beyond linking back to slow thinking, the examples themselves serve as warnings. They pinpoint moments where the temptation to jump to a conclusion is high, but the need for careful, pragmatic, fact-based, slow thinking is even higher.
Precisely. They're illustrations of decision points where applying all the principles we've discussed, filtering, checking assumptions, considering control, thinking slowly, is absolutely critical to avoid potentially regrettable outcomes.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here, digging into these ideas from Darius Foroux's Think Straight.
We really have. We started with that fundamental premise. You become what you think, powerfully illustrated by William James's personal battle and breakthrough.
And the counterpoint. We're born with amazing brains, but are often impractical thinkers, riddled with biases, and lacking the training to use our minds effectively.
Which led straight to the need for that training, treating the mind like a muscle, needing regular exercise to move beyond comfortable but potentially limiting thought patterns.
The author's London housing fiasco gave us that really vivid picture of shifting from useless, panicked chaos to focused, useful problem solving. A real-world example of thinking straight under pressure.
We touched on the long history of trying to master thought from Socrates to Descartes and landed on the pragmatic filter as a core tool. Does this thought or belief serve a useful purpose? Does it actually work in practice?
Then came the liberating idea that life isn't linear. Embracing the detours and non-obvious paths can lead to unexpected solutions, like his real estate example showed.
And the related concept of connecting the dots backward, trusting that feeding your brain diverse knowledge and experiences now, even without immediate application, builds the foundation for future insight. Like Steve Jobs said,
We saw the importance of filtering information, moving beyond potentially flawed heuristics like familiarity or social proof, and instead applying that pragmatic test, what actually works for me and impacts my life.
that led into tackling the preoccupied mind, distinguishing useful thinking from useless worry and stress, and realizing control comes from choosing which thoughts to give importance to, not from stopping them altogether.
The rule of focusing only on what you can control, desires, actions, words, intentions, emerged as a powerful way to eliminate maybe 99% of mental clutter.
We reinforced why our minds can't always be trusted, digging into cognitive biases like attentional and confirmation bias, and how awareness plus a pragmatic, neutral stance leads to better informed, if not perfect, decisions.
The distinction between facts and assumptions, and the more nuanced idea of interpretations versus absolute truth, encouraged us to base decisions on evidence while recognizing the subjective nature of much of our experience.
And finally, the strong case for slow, deliberate thinking over quick, impulsive reactions, urging patience and thoughtfulness, even if it means resisting social pressure to have instant answers.
Throughout all this, the author's core message seems consistent. Taking these practical steps to train your mind, filter information wisely, focus your energy, and think deliberately can genuinely improve the quality of your decisions, your work, and your life overall.
It really is a call to take responsibility for your own mental landscape, to see thinking not as passive, but as an active, trainable skill.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on based on everything we've discussed. Knowing that your mind naturally takes shortcuts, relies on assumptions, and is swayed by biases, and knowing that your first reaction might just be an old habit. How can you deliberately carve out a moment of pause today, before your next significant decision or important conversation, to ensure you're acting based on what actually works and serves a useful purpose for you, rather than just going with what feels familiar, easy, or seems right at first glance?
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to ReadersPair, where two readers bring you one book and endless insights. See you in the next chapter.